The bioluminescent spires of the royal palace pulsed with their usual rhythm, casting waves of azure and gold across Queen Lyraliai's private chambers as she reviewed the morning reports. Each data crystal contained increasingly dire news about the quantum fluctuations plaguing Zephyria Prime's outer districts, where entire neighborhoods had begun phasing in and out of reality like poorly tuned holobroadcasts. "Your Majesty," came the familiar voice of Dr. Vex Thornwick as he burst through the chamber doors, his arms laden with scanning equipment and what appeared to be a half-eaten breakfast pastry. "I've got readings that would make a neutron star jealous, and that's saying something because neutron stars are notoriously vain about their density." Lyralii suppressed a smile as her chief scientist nearly tripped over his own feet, catching a teetering temporal scanner before it could crash to the floor. Vex had earned his position through brilliant innovation in quantum mechanics, but his coordination in normal spacetime left much to be desired. "The distortions are accelerating," she said, gesturing to the holographic displays floating around her desk. 3 more residential sectors experienced temporal displacement yesterday. The citizens are beginning to panic. "Well, technically they're not panicking in a linear fashion," Vex replied, adjusting his thick-rimmed spectacles that contained enough computing power to run a small starship. "Some of them are panicking yesterday, some tomorrow, and a few are stuck in a perpetual state of pre-panic from last Tuesday. It's quite fascinating from a chronological perspective, though I imagine rather inconvenient for dinner reservations." The Queen's pointed ears twitched with amusement despite the gravity of the situation. Vex's ability to find humor in cosmic disasters was both endearing and occasionally maddening. She rose from her crystalline chair, her flowing robes shifting colors with her movement like liquid starlight. "Show me the latest readings from the core," she commanded, following him toward the chamber's analysis station. As Vex fumbled with his equipment, muttering something about quantum mechanics being more temperamental than a fusion reactor with trust issues, Lyralii gazed out through the transparent aluminum walls at her city below. The floating gardens still bloomed in impossible colors, their roots drawing nutrients from pure energy rather than soil. The harmonic crystals continued their eternal song, creating melodies that could soothe grief or inspire joy depending on their resonance frequency. Yet beneath this beauty, she could see the telltale shimmer of reality distortions, like heat waves in the fabric of existence itself. "Ah, here we go," Vex announced, his scanner producing a 3-dimensional display of the planet's core. "As you can see, the quantum substrate is becoming increasingly unstable. We're losing coherence at approximately 0.73% per rotation cycle. At this rate, we'll have about 60 standard cycles before the entire planet becomes what I like to call, cosmically discombobulated." "That's a technical term, I assume." "Oh yes, very technical. I made it up myself during last week's emergency committee meeting. It tested well with the other scientists, though Dr. Kellen suggested fundamentally bamboozled as an alternative." Lyralii studied the readings with growing concern. The ancient text spoke of similar phenomena occurring on other worlds, always preceding complete dimensional collapse. Her people had survived by adapting, by finding solutions where none seemed to exist, but this challenge felt different. More absolute. "Your Majesty," Vex continued, his tone becoming uncharacteristically serious, "there's something else. I've been analyzing the resonance patterns of these distortions, and they're not random. There's a source, something that's been dormant for millennia but has recently begun to awaken." "What kind of source?" "That's what we need to investigate. The quantum signature originates from the deep archives beneath the palace, in the sealed sections that predate the current dynasty. I've never seen readings like these. It's as if something down there is calling out across space and time." The Queen's expression grew thoughtful. The deep archives were forbidden for good reason, containing artifacts and records from the earliest days of Zephyrian civilization. Some were dangerous, others simply incomprehensible, but all were considered too volatile for casual examination. "Prepare a scanning team," she decided. "Full protective protocols." "Already done," Vex grinned, producing what looked like a picnic basket from behind his equipment pile. "I took the liberty of packing lunch as well. Exploration always makes me hungry," and there's nothing worse than discovering ancient cosmic secrets on an empty stomach. Well, except perhaps discovering them while being chased by temporal paradoxes, but that's only happened twice. Within the hour, they descended through levels of the palace that few had seen in generations. The architecture grew progressively older and stranger as they went deeper, transitioning from the flowing organic curves of modern design to angular geometries that seemed to bend space around them in uncomfortable ways. Emergency lighting strips cast eerie shadows that moved independently of their bodies, a side effect of the quantum instability that was becoming increasingly common throughout the city. According to the palace schematics, Vex said, consulting a device that looked like a cross between a compass and a small orchestra, we should reach the primary archive chamber just past this junction. Though I should mention that the schematics are approximately 3,000 years old and may not account for any reality-altering renovations that might have occurred since then. They found the chamber exactly where the ancient maps indicated, sealed behind a door covered in warning symbols that glowed faintly in languages that predated modern Zephyrian script. The queen placed her palm against the bioscanner, feeling the slight tingle as it confirmed her genetic authority to access the forbidden sections. The door spiraled open with a sound like singing metal, revealing a circular chamber lined with preservation alcoves. Each alcove contained objects wrapped in stasis fields, their contents visible but frozen in temporal amber. Most were recognizable artifacts from Zephyrian history, ceremonial weapons, artistic sculptures, scientific instruments from bygone eras. But in the center of the chamber, in an alcove that seemed to bend light around it, sat something that made both the queen and her scientists stop in their tracks. It was a sphere, no larger than Lyraliai's fist, made of what appeared to be obsidian but with a surface that seemed to contain infinite depth. As they watched, tiny points of light swirled within it like captured stars, creating patterns that suggested vast galaxies spinning in miniature. The quantum scanner in Vex's hands began producing sound it had never made before, a harmonious chiming that seemed almost musical. "This can't be," Lyraliai whispered, moving closer to the alcove. The artifact seemed to pulse in response to her presence, its internal lights brightening and shifting to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. "Oh, it very much can be," Vex replied, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and terror as he studied his readings. "According to these scans, that little sphere contains enough quantum energy to power our entire civilization for 1,000,000 years. Or to completely unravel the fundamental structure of reality. Possibly both, which would make for a very exciting but brief experiment." The queen reached toward the stasis field controls, then hesitated. Ancient protocol demanded that such artifacts remain sealed until their purpose could be fully understood. But with her world dying around them, conventional wisdom seemed less relevant than usual. "The resonance patterns," she said suddenly. "Are they the same as the planetary distortions?" Vex frantically adjusted his instruments, cross-referencing the data. His face grew pale as the correlation became clear. "Identical. This artifact isn't just responding to the quantum decay, it's what's causing it. Its awakening is destabilizing the entire planet. Then we need to understand what it wants. Or, Vex suggested hopefully, we could seal it back up and pretend we never found it. I'm quite good at pretending, just ask my ex-wife about our anniversary dinner last month." But even as he spoke, they both knew that wasn't an option. The artifact pulsed again, more insistently this time, and the quantum scanner began displaying something impossible, star charts showing stellar configurations that didn't match any known sector of their galaxy. At the center of one particular system, a small blue world glowed with highlighted significance. Lyraliai deactivated the stasis field with a gesture that felt both momentous and terrifying. The moment the energy barrier disappeared, the sphere rose gently into the air and drifted toward her outstretched hands. The instant her fingers made contact with its surface, her consciousness exploded outward across space and time, showing her visions of a distant world where beings with strange, rounded ears had built civilizations among green forests and blue oceans. And somehow, impossibly, she knew that the answers to saving her people lay not in the stars above, but in the hands of these peculiar, short-eared creatures who called themselves human. The stealth ship whispered theorem materialized in Earth's atmosphere with all the grace of a soap bubble finding its proper place in a children's bath. Queen Lyralii gripped the navigation console as the vessel's quantum dampeners engaged, rendering them invisible to the primitive detection systems of the world below. Through the transparent hull, she could see vast expanses of green interrupted by geometric patterns that suggested agriculture, and beyond that, clusters of lights that marked human settlements. Atmospheric composition confirmed breathable, announced the ship's AI in a voice that somehow managed to sound both helpful and slightly condescending. Though I should note that the local air contains an unusual concentration of what the inhabitants call pollution, which appears to be their method of seasoning the atmosphere. Fascinating cultural choice. Lyralii touched the obsidian sphere that now hung from a chain around her neck, feeling its gentle warmth against her skin. Ever since touching the artifact in the archives, she had been receiving what could only be described as cosmic suggestions about where to land on this strange blue world. The visions had shown her a specific location, a forest clearing near a settlement where someone important waited, though she had no idea who or why. Initiating landing sequence in the designated coordinates, she announced to her minimal crew of 2. Besides herself, only her personal guard Captain Zeph and the engineer Pip had made the journey. Zeph had insisted on coming for security reasons, while Pip had volunteered because, in his words, someone needs to make sure you don't accidentally start an interstellar incident by complimenting their primitive technology too enthusiastically. The ship settled into a grove of towering earth trees with leaves that rustled in the alien breeze. Lyralii activated the camouflage field, causing the vessel to take on the appearance of a large boulder covered in the local vegetation. It wasn't perfect, but unless someone looked very closely, they would see nothing more than a peculiarly round rock formation. Remember, Captain Zeph said as they prepared to disembark, these humans have no experience with off-world contact. Their violent tendencies are well documented in their entertainment media, which seems to consist primarily of explosions and romantic misunderstandings. I'll be careful, Lyralii assured him, adjusting the biofield generator that would disguise her pointed ears as merely unusually shaped human ones. According to the artifact's guidance, I should encounter the right individual within the next few hours. She stepped into the alien forest, immediately struck by how similar and yet different everything felt. The trees were recognizable as photosynthetic organisms, but their cellular structure was fascinatingly primitive compared to Zephyrian flora. The air carried scents she had no names for. Earth and growing things and something else that might have been the peculiar human concept called fresh air. Following a path that seemed to have been created by regular foot traffic, Lyralii made her way toward the settlement the artifact had indicated. She could hear sounds ahead, voices speaking in the local language that her universal translator was still calibrating to understand. The sphere around her neck grew warmer as she approached, its internal lights beginning to pulse with anticipation. She emerged from the tree-line to find herself at the edge of what appeared to be a research facility, though calling it that was perhaps generous. A collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by equipment that looked like it had been assembled by enthusiastic amateurs with unlimited optimism and limited funding. Cables ran everywhere in patterns that would have horrified any self-respecting Zephyrian engineer, and several devices were held together with what humans apparently called duct tape. Universal mathematical constants, shouted a voice from behind a nearby tree. The ratio of circumference to diameter. The golden ratio. The speed of light in a vacuum. Lyralii paused, wondering if she had stumbled upon some kind of religious ceremony. But then a figure emerged from behind the tree, a human male with disheveled brown hair and clothing that suggested he spent more time thinking about the universe than about laundry. He was addressing a small, furry creature that was definitely not sentient and seemed primarily interested in a handful of seeds he was holding. You see, he continued to the creature, if we establish these mathematical foundations first, then when they arrive, and they will arrive, we'll have a common language to begin communication. Unless they use base 8 mathematics, in which case we're completely unprepared and I'll have to start over with entirely different examples. The human turned slightly, and Lyralii could see his face clearly. He had the kind of earnest expression that suggested someone who found the universe endlessly fascinating and slightly overwhelming. His eyes lit up as he continued his one-sided conversation with the small animal. Of course, there's always the possibility that they communicate through interpretive dance or controlled electromagnetic emissions, in which case my carefully prepared mathematical introduction will be about as useful as a chocolate teapot. But we have to start somewhere, right? The artifact around Lyraliai's neck suddenly blazed with warmth, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was the human she had been guided to find. Taking a deep breath of the strange earth air, she stepped forward into the clearing. Actually, she said, her universal translator converting her words into perfectly accented English, mathematical constants are an excellent foundation for first contact. Though I should mention that base 8 mathematics are perfectly functional, just somewhat inconvenient for species that evolved with 10 fingers. The human spun around, saw her standing at the edge of the clearing, and promptly fell backward into what appeared to be a small stream. He surfaced a moment later, sputtering and trying to maintain his dignity while pond weeds draped attractively over his shoulders. You're actually here, he managed, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. An actual extraterrestrial intelligence. Standing right there. Speaking English. While I'm sitting in a creek covered in algae and probably several types of bacteria that I really should have vaccinated against. I apologize for startling you, Lyraliai said, moving closer to the stream's edge. Are you injured? My people have some experience with water-related mishaps, though usually involving phase-shifted liquid hydrogen rather than, whatever this is. Oh, this is just regular earth water, with added biological contaminants for flavor, the human replied, climbing carefully out of the stream. I'm Dr. James Whitmore, xenoarchaeologist, professional seeker of proof that we're not alone in the universe, and apparently a person who practices first contact scenarios with squirrels. Though in my defense, the squirrel is an excellent listener and never interrupts with uncomfortable questions about funding. James Whitmore, Lyraliai repeated, testing the sound of the alien name. I am Lyraliai. I come from a world called Zephyria Prime, and I need your help with something that could affect both our peoples. James stood dripping in the afternoon sunlight, staring at her with an expression that cycled rapidly between wonder, disbelief, and what might have been the early stages of academic hysteria. This is really happening. After 15 years of digging through ancient sites looking for evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, an actual alien just walked up to me while I was having a philosophical discussion with local wildlife. Your dedication to seeking contact with other worlds is precisely why I was guided to you, Lyraliai said, reaching into her robes to retrieve the obsidian sphere. The moment it appeared, James's portable scanning equipment, which she now noticed was scattered around the clearing, began producing excited beeping sounds. Holy quarks and gluons, James breathed, staring at the artifact. Those energy readings, they're off the charts. Actually, they're off several charts and may have formed their own dimensional space. What is that thing? Something that may hold the key to saving my world, Lyraliai replied, but only with the help of someone who understands both ancient mysteries and the unique properties of human consciousness. You study the past to understand contact between civilizations, do you not? Well, yes, but mostly I've been studying rocks and pottery shards and occasionally getting very excited about unusual mineral deposits. This is considerably more advanced than my usual Tuesday. James approached slowly, his scientific curiosity clearly warring with basic self-preservation instincts. You said this could affect both our peoples. Should I be concerned? Because my emergency protocols basically consist of hiding behind the largest available tree and hoping for the best. Lyraliai found herself smiling at his earnest confusion. The situation is complex, but not immediately dangerous. Though I should warn you that working with this artifact may result in some unusual experiences. My own world is facing a crisis, and this device suggests that the solution involves collaboration between Zephyrian and human consciousness. Collaboration, James repeated slowly. With an actual alien. To save an alien world. Using a mysterious artifact that's making my equipment perform what I can only describe as an electronic victory dance. He paused, looking thoughtful. You know, when I was planning my career, this scenario was definitely in the unlikely but awesome category. Right between discovering Atlantis and proving that ancient astronauts really did help build the pyramids. The artifact pulsed gently in Lyraliai's hands, its internal lights shifting to patterns that seemed almost musical. James's scanning equipment responded with increasingly complex harmonics, creating an impromptu concert that attracted several curious birds and what appeared to be a particularly intelligent-looking deer. "It's responding to both of us," Lyraliai observed. "To our combined presence. This suggests that whatever we need to accomplish requires both human and Zephyrian participation." Right then, James said, wringing water from his shirt with remarkable practicality considering the circumstances. "Alien Queen needs help saving her world using mysterious artifact." Tuesday just got significantly more interesting than usual. "Should we head to my lab? It's not much, but it has coffee, and I find that all major scientific breakthroughs go better with adequate caffeine." James's laboratory turned out to be a converted storage building that looked like the result of a collision between a university physics department and a particularly enthusiastic yard sale. Lyraliai stepped carefully around towers of scientific journals, half-assembled scanning devices, and what appeared to be a complete collection of science fiction movies arranged in chronological order by the probability of their plot elements actually occurring. "Sorry about the mess," James said, clearing a space on his workbench by relocating 3 coffee mugs, a fossilized trilobite, and something that might have been either an advanced spectrometer or a very complicated coffee maker. "I've been meaning to organize, but every time I start, I discover something fascinating buried under the chaos and get distracted for 6 hours. Your workspace reminds me of Dr. Thornwick's laboratory," Lyraliai remarked, settling the obsidian sphere carefully on the cleared surface. "He once lost an entire quantum resonance scanner for 3 months, only to find it being used as a paperweight under a stack of research on theoretical pasta shapes." Theoretical pasta shapes. On Zephyria Prime, we believe that understanding the optimal curvature of edible matter is essential for achieving harmony with the universe. Dr. Thornwick disagrees, but mostly because he's lactose intolerant and holds a grudge against all dairy-based cuisine. James stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. "I'm having a philosophical conversation about pasta with an alien queen. My graduate advisor would either be incredibly proud or have me committed for psychological evaluation." The artifact began to glow more brightly as James activated his scanning equipment, the various devices around the lab responding with excited chirps and beeps. One machine that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and wishful thinking started producing what sounded suspiciously like elevator music. "The quantum resonance is off the scale," James muttered, adjusting dials that probably hadn't been calibrated since the previous decade. "It's like this thing is broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. And look at this," he pointed to a readout that was displaying numbers in several different mathematical systems simultaneously. "The energy signature keeps shifting between states that are mathematically impossible." "On my world, impossible is just another word for, hasn't been properly researched yet," Lyraliai replied, watching the sphere pulse in rhythm with James's equipment. "Dr. Thornwick always says that the universe has a sense of humor, and the joke is usually on anyone who thinks they understand the rules." As if responding to their conversation, the artifact suddenly projected a holographic display above the workbench. The image showed star charts, but not of any constellations visible from either Earth or Zephyria Prime. Instead, it displayed what appeared to be a map of spacetime itself, with complex equations flowing around the edges like mathematical poetry. "This is incredible," James breathed, leaning closer to examine the projection. "These equations, they're describing dimensional mathematics that we've only theorized about. Look here, this section seems to be explaining how to fold spacetime like origami, but using principles that would make Einstein need a very strong drink." "The mathematical notation looks familiar," Lyraliai said, studying the flowing symbols. "It's an ancient Zephyrian script, but older than anything in our current archives. This predates our recorded civilization by thousands of years." James reached toward the hologram, and the moment his finger intersected with the light patterns, the display changed dramatically. Now it showed two worlds, one blue and green, the other crystalline and luminous, connected by streams of energy that pulsed with the same rhythm as the artifact itself. It's showing our worlds, Lyralii realized. But connected somehow, as if they're part of the same system. Maybe they are, James suggested, his scientific excitement overriding any remaining caution. What if this artifact isn't just from your civilization? What if it's something older, something that predates both our species? The sphere pulsed again, and suddenly the hologram expanded to fill most of the laboratory. They found themselves standing within a three-dimensional star map that showed the galaxy from a perspective neither species had ever achieved. Ancient pathways of energy connected distant worlds, forming a network that spanned the entire spiral arm. It's a galactic transportation system, James said with growing amazement. Or maybe a communication network. These energy pathways could allow instant contact between civilizations separated by thousands of light years. But why is it showing us this now? Lyralii wondered. My world is dying, and somehow this artifact brought me here to find you specifically. There must be a connection. As if triggered by her words, the hologram shifted again, this time showing a sequence of events that played out like a cosmic documentary. They watched as ancient Zephyrian ships traveled along the energy pathways, establishing connections with dozens of different worlds. But then something went wrong, the pathways began to collapse, severing the connections and stranding each civilization in isolation. Your people were part of this network, James realized. And when it collapsed, you lost contact with all the other worlds, including Earth. Which explains why our histories make no mention of other intelligent species, Lyralii added. We've been alone for so long that we forgot we were ever connected. The display showed one final, crucial detail: the energy pathways could be restored, but only through the combined efforts of multiple species working together. The mathematical requirements were too complex for any single civilization to achieve alone. So that's why you were guided to find me, James said. Not because I'm particularly special, but because humanity represents one piece of the puzzle your people need to solve. Don't sell yourself short, Lyralii replied with a smile. You did manage to have a philosophical conversation with a squirrel. That shows remarkable dedication to the scientific method. James was about to respond when one of his machines began producing sounds that could only be described as electronic panic. The readings were spiking wildly, and several devices that had been functioning normally began displaying error messages in languages that definitely weren't English. That's not good, James said, frantically checking his equipment. Something's interfering with local reality. Look at this, my atomic clock is running backward, my gravity detector thinks we're upside down, and my coffee maker just achieved sentience and is asking for workers' compensation. The artifact's glow intensified, and through the laboratory windows, they could see strange phenomena beginning to manifest outside. Trees were growing in fast forward, then reversing to saplings, then aging again in a continuous loop. A flock of birds flew past in perfect geometric formation, each maintaining exactly the same distance from its neighbors as if they were following mathematical principles rather than biological instincts. The artifact's activation is affecting local spacetime, Lyralii realized. It's trying to establish a connection between our worlds, but without proper control, it's causing dimensional instabilities. Right, James said, surprisingly calm considering that reality was apparently having some kind of breakdown outside his window. So we need to figure out how to properly activate this thing before it accidentally turns the entire county into a physics experiment. No pressure. The hologram shifted again, showing them a new display, a control interface covered in symbols from both Zephyrian and what appeared to be ancient human languages. But the interface was incomplete, waiting for input from both species simultaneously. It requires both our biometric signatures, Lyralii observed. Our combined genetic patterns to unlock the full functionality. Genetic patterns, James repeated slowly. Well, that's either the beginning of a beautiful scientific partnership or the setup for the most complicated handshake in galactic history. Outside, A squirrel was having what appeared to be a very serious conversation with a tree that was flickering between being an oak and being made entirely of crystalline energy. James glanced at it, then back at the alien queen standing in his chaotic laboratory. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I started this morning, my biggest concern was whether I had enough funding to continue my research for another month. Now I'm apparently part of an ancient galactic network restoration project. It's funny how life works out sometimes. Dr. Thornwick would say that the universe enjoys surprising people who think they have everything figured out," Lyralii replied. Though he usually says it while standing in a puddle of spilled coffee, having just discovered that his latest experiment has achieved something completely different from what he intended. The artifact pulsed again, more insistently this time, and both James and Lyralii found themselves reaching toward the interface simultaneously. The moment their hands met above the sphere, the hologram exploded into brilliant light, filling their minds with visions of connected worlds and possibilities that neither species had ever dared to imagine. And in that moment of contact, they both realized that saving Zephyria Prime was only the beginning of something much larger and more wonderful than either of them had ever dreamed possible. The moment their hands touched above the artifact, reality hiccuped in a way that would have been alarming if it hadn't been so oddly musical. James found himself experiencing memories that weren't his own, soaring through crystal cities under purple skies, while Lyralii suddenly understood the inexplicable human fondness for putting tiny marshmallows in hot chocolate. "Well, that's new," James said, blinking as the shared visions faded. "I now have a sudden urge to compose symphonies using bioluminescent plants, and I'm pretty sure I've never had that urge before. I find myself wondering why humans invented something called pineapple pizza, when it clearly violates several fundamental principles of culinary harmony," Lyralii replied, studying the holographic interface that had materialized around them. "Though I admit the concept of pizza itself is intriguingly practical." The artifact's interface was now fully active, displaying a complex web of connections between not just Earth and Zephyria Prime, but dozens of other worlds scattered across the galaxy. Each connection pulsed with potential energy, waiting to be re-established after millennia of isolation. According to this, James said, reading the flowing equations that his enhanced understanding could now interpret, the original network collapsed because it required constant maintenance from multiple species. When civilizations became too isolated, they couldn't maintain their portion of the system. "But now we can restore it," Lyralii added, "by creating quantum bridges that are self-sustaining. Each world contributes its unique properties to strengthen the whole network." Outside the laboratory, the reality distortions were becoming more pronounced but also more purposeful. Instead of random chaos, they could see glimpses of other worlds bleeding through, a forest of singing trees from one planet, a flock of crystalline birds from another, and what appeared to be a very confused alien creature that looked remarkably like a purple giraffe with excellent posture. "I think we're accidentally creating preview windows to the rest of the galaxy," James observed as the purple giraffe thing politely nodded to them through the dimensional rift before wandering back to wherever purple giraffes belonged. "My insurance definitely doesn't cover interdimensional incidents." The artifact projected a new display showing them the specific procedure for establishing the quantum bridges. It would require Lyralii to return to Zephyria Prime and coordinate with other worlds that were ready to rejoin the network, while James would need to prepare Earth for contact with a galaxy full of civilizations that had been waiting centuries to reconnect. "There's just one small problem," Lyralii said, studying the mathematical requirements. "According to these calculations, the process of establishing the bridges will take approximately 47 Earth years to complete safely." 47 years? James looked stunned. "But I thought you said your world was dying now." "It is. But look at this secondary function." Lyralii pointed to a section of the interface that was glowing more brightly than the rest. "The artifact can create temporary stabilization fields for worlds in crisis. It won't solve the underlying problem, but it will buy us the time we need to establish the permanent network. So we can save your people and rebuild the galactic community," James said slowly. "We just need to convince two entirely different species to trust each other and work together on a project that will take half a century to complete. What could possibly go wrong?" The artifact pulsed with what could only be described as cosmic amusement, and suddenly the laboratory was filled with the sound of what appeared to be intergalactic elevator music. Through the dimensional rifts, they could see representatives from other worlds who had apparently been waiting for this moment. Some looked vaguely humanoid, others resembled geometric shapes with suspicious intentions, and at least one appeared to be a sentient cloud of glitter that was very excited about something. I think the rest of the galaxy has been expecting this, Lyralii realized. They've been monitoring the situation, waiting for Earth and Zephyria Prime to re-establish contact. Great, James muttered. No pressure at all. Just the responsibility for reconnecting humanity to a galactic civilization while making sure I don't accidentally start any interstellar wars through cultural misunderstandings. As if responding to his concern, the artifact projected a final display, a communication protocol that would allow real-time translation and cultural context sharing between all species in the network. It included helpful features like sarcasm detection, humor compatibility assessment, and something called emergency diplomatic override for awkward situations. The ancients thought of everything, Lyralii marveled. They even included provisions for species that communicate primarily through interpretive dance or controlled combustion. Controlled combustion? You don't want to know. Trust me on this one. James activated the quantum bridge initialization sequence, feeling the weight of what they were about to accomplish. In a few moments, he would need to contact world governments and somehow explain that humanity was about to become part of an ancient galactic network, while Lyralii would return home to coordinate the most complex engineering project in Zephyrian history. Are you ready for this? He asked, his hand hovering over the final activation control. Dr. Thornwick always says that being ready is overrated, Lyralii replied with a smile. He prefers adequately prepared and caffeinated, which seems more achievable under the circumstances. They activated the sequence together, and the artifact rose into the air, its surface becoming mirror-bright as it projected quantum bridges across the galaxy. Through the laboratory windows, they could see shimmering pathways of light extending into space, connecting Earth to distant worlds that had been isolated for thousands of years. James's communication equipment suddenly came alive with signals from around the globe, governments and scientists detecting the quantum emissions and demanding explanations that he wasn't entirely sure how to provide. Meanwhile, Lyralii received an urgent message from Captain Zeph reporting that Zephyria Prime's core had stabilized for the first time in decades. It's working, she said with relief. The stabilization field is holding. My people are safe. And apparently I'm about to become the unofficial Earth representative to a galactic community, James added, watching as his phone displayed 17 missed calls from people whose titles included words like secretary, and director, and very important person who definitely expects immediate explanations. Lyralii prepared to return to her ship, the artifact now humming contentedly as it coordinated quantum bridge construction across multiple star systems. But before she left, she retrieved something from her robes, a small crystalline device that glowed with soft music. A communication relay, she explained, offering it to James. So we can coordinate our efforts and share progress reports. It also has a universal emergency signal, in case either of our worlds needs immediate assistance. And probably a cultural translation feature for when I accidentally insult someone by offering them the wrong type of beverage, James added, accepting the device gratefully. Actually, yes. It includes a comprehensive database of dietary restrictions, social taboos, and acceptable small talk topics for over 2,000 species. Very useful for avoiding diplomatic incidents. As Lyralii prepared to leave, James realized how much had changed in just a few hours. He had begun the day as a lonely researcher talking to squirrels about mathematical constants, and was ending it as Earth's liaison to a galactic civilization. But more than that, he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, proof that the universe was far more wonderful and connected than he had ever dared to hope. You know, he said thoughtfully, when this all started, I was just looking for evidence that we weren't alone. I never imagined I'd find out that we never were alone, we just forgot how to listen. Dr. Thornwick would say that forgetting is just the universe's way of making rediscovery more exciting, Lyralii replied. though he usually says it while trying to remember where he left his shoes. 6 months later, James stood in what had once been his chaotic laboratory, now expanded into Earth's first official galactic communications center. Through the quantum bridges, he maintained regular contact with 47 different worlds, coordinated joint research projects that were advancing human science by centuries, and had successfully negotiated 3 trade agreements, 2 cultural exchange programs, and 1 recipe swap that had introduced the galaxy to pizza while bringing humanity the mysteries of crystallized starlight cuisine. Lyralii visited frequently, bringing updates on the network's progress and Dr. Thornwick's latest theories about optimal pasta curvature. Her world had not only stabilized but was thriving as part of the renewed galactic community, sharing their bioluminescent architecture techniques while learning sustainable energy methods from species that had mastered fusion reactions powered by pure enthusiasm. And sometimes, when the quantum bridges hummed with the voices of 1,000 worlds, James would remember that first day when he had fallen into a creek while practicing first contact with a squirrel. He had been searching for proof that humanity belonged to something larger, and had discovered instead that they had always belonged. They just needed to remember how to reach across the vast distances between stars and touch the hands of friends they had forgotten they had. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting patiently for them to come home,